What was if you had an agent where you could say, hey, what's the snapshot? What's the state of play with all of my bids right now? And you were able to get an adaptive card to say, hey, you've got 7 active RFPs, 12 that are pending, and some average turnaround times. And then you could ask more questions about that. But wouldn't it be even cooler if you had a set of agents that did these tasks for you? But wouldn't it be cooler if we had a set of agents that were able to do those bespoke tasks for us? So we're going to talk about autonomic agents today. And think of this as in the way that we think of agents is they're specialized agents that have a specific task or set of instructions. And I started showing my customers about like what it would mean to create like an RFP agent or a sales and bids agent or a set of agents that a human being could use to do different aspects of those tasks. And I started to show some of these slides that we've got access to here. So like going from this being very manual today to using agents that can retrieve information very quickly, but then talking about autonomous agents or using an agent that's able to facilitate that specific need. And we talked about the different use cases, like being able to retrieve those RFPs and the requirements. So really fully understanding like what is the customer actually asking for. Being able to learn from other resources. So another customer said, well, we've got all this historic information about how we've won different tenders, responses, or RFPs in the past. Why can't we learn from that information? I'm like, yeah, of course we can. We can bring that in as knowledge, and then we can get the agent to reason over that. And then we talked about other agents that were able to do the kind of detailed structure from pricing analysis to technical analysis of the RFP, understanding whether that's a piece of work that we actually want to do, of course, and then being able to put together the response ready for this RFP. And like you've seen in some of my other videos as well, I've talked about the anatomy of an agent. So this is where the orchestrator, the brain of this agent, is able to pull on all of the different resources it's got access to, whether that's tools, whether it's knowledge, whether it's third-party information. Like we're able to bring all of that in. So again, this is a slide that I was sharing with my customers to talk about how you could create an agent that has access to all of these different tools and how it would use it. The orchestrator or the planner is able to understand this set of instructions that it has and choose which steps it should take when, depending on the information it's pulling and pushing outside of this agent. So in this example, you might have other agents that allow it to be autonomous, or the tools that it's pulling to bring extra information in to decide what is the next step or what it's going to do. And then I thought, well, in the advent of now Copilot Studio supporting multi-agent workflows or multi-agent orchestration, why don't we like break that down? Because when we're creating this plan, these sets of instructions for these agents, we can have up to 8,000 characters of instruction that we can put in there, but it's monolithic. And when I was creating these, I was finding that like when I was starting out, obviously I would never get the instructions right first time. But as and when I was testing, like things were breaking and I would tweak things and I get one part of that component working, I was telling my customers then that the way that you need to structure your instructions is that you need precise parts within those instructions so you can quickly diagnose it. And then with the advent of multi-agent orchestration, now I think things have shifted slightly. So I've got a different perspective now about how I might create agents like this RFP solution and then really break down all of those different components so it makes it easier not to just debug, but also for a process to run or implement other features that I might need in the future. And that brought me to atomic agents. Now, you may not have heard this term before, but think of atomic agents being a set of multi-agents that you can call on. And that's very different to the monolithic agents that we're creating today, or monolithic bots or chatbots or whatever you're talking about. Like I said, in Copilot Studio, for one agent, you have up to 8,000 characters you can write as part of the instructions. It's quite a lot of information, but it's really, really hard to debug. It was really hard when it fails. And then in the future, when the models change, you're going to have to go in and write those instructions. And some of my customers are just saying, well, we not only want to test this as we're creating these agents to ensure they're giving the right outputs, but in the future, we want this whole agent lifecycle piece to work. Like, how are we going to do that? And I think we can make lives a lot easier using atomic agents, as in these agents now have focused work. So they have a predefined set of instructions that's very small. They have access to their own knowledge and tools. So we can have specialist agents here that are able to retrieve information or do specific tasks for us that no other agent would have access to. But as and when that changes, or whether it fails, we can go into that specific atomic agent and make changes there. We can swap these agents as well because they're stateless. It means that it's not going to break our entire workflow. So we can add or remove or edit agents as we see fit. And of course, if anything fails, then we get the planner, the orchestrator, the main brain agent in order to skip or retry specific tasks or agents as and when it seems fit. So in essence, what I'm trying to say is like breaking the process into atomic agents means it's faster iteration, like when you're building this, it's safer to test, there's clear ownership. So not only one person owns one agent, you might have people in the business that own those specific agents. And if you want to add like other agents or like real costing into your RFP later on as part of your initial testing, then you could just replace a pricing agent with another agent. There's no actual coding that you have to do as part of it. Now, brace yourself. The next slide is a little bit busy, but this is what I've been working on over the last couple of days when I'm breaking down all of the specific needs that an RFP management team actually need to do. So again, this isn't verbatim, but think of this at the very top is we've got our orchestrator, our planner. And if I zoom in slightly here, you're able to see that each of these agents, they all have their own knowledge sources, their own instructions, their own tools. I'm not using topics within here. I still see people using topics for more structured conversations. So if you're asking the end user specific questions and you want to bring that in, you can do that. But you don't necessarily need to use topics. That could be added to part of the instructions as and when you see fit. The newer capabilities within Copilot Studio is multi-agent orchestration. So this orchestrator can call, let me just move my slide slightly, is this orchestrator can call other agents and then bring back that conversation from that agent so it's been enriched by that specific agent. So for example, you can see I've got an intake agent over here that has its own knowledge sources, it's got its own tools it's got access to, and it's got its own instructions. Now, I know this is a little bit blurry because this is quite a detailed slide, but you can also have inside these agents, child agents. So think of these as like little mini sub agents that sit inside a main agent. In this use case, I'm not using those, but if you don't require like the full capabilities of a full agent, then you don't necessarily have to. You can have child agents that also do this as well. So I just want to kind of highlight that unless you've seen that, of course. I also found as I was pulling and pushing information around these different agents, I needed a way to be able to store that in memory. So if you're not aware of AI and how context windows work, think of this as a memory, as in a brain. So it's live memory. And there are some limits within Copilot Studio about how much it can retain within its memory. So I started to put in some little kind of knowledge sources and tools within here that I could call on as like simple memory. So I'm using things like a function app within Azure, or I'm using Dataverse in order to retain that information that I'm collecting for all these agents and then ensure that's not forgotten. And then I can reuse that memory a little bit later on or as part of other agents or another process as I see fit in the future. You can also see as well, I've got lots of lines. These are grouped, but they are all in parallel, as in the orchestrator has access to all of these agents underneath. And I'll try and show you this within Copilot Studio in a second. But there is a flow to this, and the flow is articulated within the instructions of the orchestrator. So this is what we can see at the very top in this very blurry text, apologies, this is the plan I want you to step through. And because it knows as the planner that it has access to all of these agents, then it can call on those as and when it sees fit to complete the plan. Now, if there is a failure, Say, for example, that the intake tries to go out to the Graph API to look at RFP information from someone's Outlook mailbox. Say that fails, there might be a failover then to look for that type of intake from a SharePoint site, for example. That's where we're storing all the RFPs. So we can be quite dynamic within the intake agent to also understand, like, what's my purpose? What are the things I'm going to do? If this fails, then I can do this. And then I'm going to pass that information back to the orchestrator to understand what is the next step within the instructions. Hope that makes sense. And just to show you, like, once the planner has got the information from the intake, then we can call out to these certain groups of agents that I've created, these atomic agents. So they make up the group 1, for example, and group 2, and we've got group 3, group 4, and a final group on its own, which is actually submitting the RFP. Now you can see these groups have multiple agents inside them. They might not necessarily use these in series, but they might be used in parallel. So for example, if the requirement agent actually looks through the requirements and it gets its information from its knowledge, which is SharePoint in this case, it's able to push that information back up to the orchestrator to say, look, these are the number of requirements as part of this RFP. Now we might want to think about looking at other proposals that we've done in the past to maybe reuse some information there, or even if we failed on an RFP before that has similar requirements, like what are our learnings that we captured from last time. So that orchestrator is able then to look at the plan and say, well, go and get this information from the proposal search, and then so on and so forth. So it's going up and down the orchestrator depending on the information that it's got access to. Something that's not supported today is multi-agent workflows, as in it's not able to chain agents together. This is what I mean, sorry, around that kind of multi-agent workflow piece, as in you couldn't have the orchestrator connected to the requirement agent and then the requirement agent connected to the proposal agent. There's a song there somewhere, but you're able to have the orchestrator that connects to all of these and then it decides on what agents it needs. The cool thing about this is, especially with using generative answers, is it doesn't necessarily have to follow all of the plans. So if it's got some of the information or it doesn't require, for example, pricing like group 3, it could skip that step dynamically for us. So it's using whatever agents it needs to call on at the appropriate time for the appropriate use. And that kind of brings us on to context engineering. So you can see right down the bottom here within our pricing agent. So I've got a BOM, which is in CSV, and I've got some insights as well as kind of part of my knowledge piece for that specific agent. But in some AI models, it's not very good at math. And I want it to be, especially for pricing, right? That needs to be correct. So here you can see I'm calling a tool and I can use a reasoning model like OpenAI 01, or you could use something like DeepSeek or Grok, for example. So you could call in a model for that specific need, that specific agent as part of that piece as well. Especially around quality control. I might want to reason or think more clearly about the response that I'm going to give. So you can see I've got some extra tools that I've given this agent in order to reason over that with a thinking model. And you can see where I'm starting to pull in other data resources. So I've got Dataverse here as part of our strategy. That's where we're storing some of our information. Our spending insight, this can be either pulled as knowledge or we could actually push information into Dataverse as well. And then you can start to see that I'm also reusing memory in some of these agents as well, just to kind of retain all of the information I need that might be outside of those limits around the context window. So let's show you this in Copilot Studio. Now you can see there's a number of different RFP agents I've created. There's about 10 in total. And this mimics the diagram that I showed you just a second ago. But within the set of agents, the orchestrator core, this is the main brain. And when I'm talking to customers about like building these agents, usually less is more when it comes to instructions, unless of course your agent is going off and just making something up or doing something you're not expecting. So remember, give it a purpose, a role, the plan of what steps you want it to go through. So don't feel like you have to go off to topics and do all of those wonderful stuff in there. You can actually create steps within the instructions. the dependencies, the things you don't want to do, and the expected outcomes. So just, you can pause the screen, of course, to see what these instructions are. They're not very big, but remember the more detailed instructions are called on when the orchestrator is calling out to each of those individual agents. Now, I wanted to make this as slick as possible. So what I'm doing, the first step is I can call out to an ID. Let me click on that, and I can paste that in. And we can watch the process here about exactly how the orchestrator is calling on all of those different atomic agents. Now here it's going off to the graph in order to find the information from a mailbox, which is cool. So we can call in those connectors to do that. Then we can see it going off to the RFP requirement agents. It's actually looking at its knowledge to understand what the next step is. So in this case, it's going through and understanding and collecting all the requirements as part of the RFP. So this is pretty cool as well in this interface. You can see how long these agents are actually taking to respond. Now, I've noticed that it's not come up in here, and I've also noticed I'm not in preview here. So if you wanted to go and see that, you can type in preview within the middle of Copilot Studio and Microsoft, and you'll be able to see the little tags here that I've just mentioned but aren't on the screen. That's my problem. And then we can see the process then of the orchestrator calling on each of those individual agents. Now, some of these agents don't have any extra steps. They're actually checking the RFP, and they have defined within their instructions their purpose and what their role is within that. And then eventually we can see it completing. Now, I haven't got a real RFP yet to put through this. If you have one that I can reuse, that'd be awesome. And I can do another video on this. But the whole purpose of this is to be autonomous. So I don't necessarily, as a bid manager, have to go in and type in the RFP. I could have a trigger here. So when an RFP gets dropped into my mailbox or shared mailbox or OneDrive, for example, this orchestrator could kick off automatically and then start to go through and define all of the different parts and elements that are required as part of that response to the RFP. And even then tell me, it could be via a Teams pop-up or another email to me as the bid master that the output is being completed, and they would be up to me as the specialist within here to actually review its output. Of course, that's super important when any AI is creating an output or creating an asset for you, that you are in the loop, you are in charge. You should be also checking this as well. Just to show you quickly as well, the most important agent that I created in here is this intake agent. So this is what goes and collects the information for or on behalf of the orchestrator. So I just wanted to show you another set of instructions about what it's doing. So to make this process more structured, I'm actually using JSON in here to have a structured pull and pull of that response. And I've given it, again, less is more. These are only the instructions I'm using to go and collect that information. And then I've got a set of tools up here as well, like this send HTTP request, which is a built-in connector from Microsoft that connects to the Microsoft graph. Again, this is able to go and collect information from a user's mailbox, because that's where the RFP might be sat. And I'm telling it within the instructions about how it should go and get the information from the graph. So you can see here I'm quite explicit. I'm giving it, if I stop scrolling up and down, giving it some examples about what it should put as the URL. And then it's dynamically filling that in for me with the search criteria of whatever the user is searching for, right? Or wherever the orchestrator is looking for. So I just wanted to show you that how easy it is to build these atomic agents, why it is super easy to make multiple of these and then join them together. I should probably show you that as well. So if we go back to our orchestrator for a second, because remember, chaining isn't supported right now. It will let you do it, by the way, if you try and chain agents backwards. So you're from the end point, like the submission of this RFP, and you start chaining these, you can actually do it within the UI. Just because you can do something means that you probably don't always need to or shouldn't. But you will get an error message when you're starting to test that, saying that agent chaining has been seen, and it won't allow you to use it anyway. But When we go into our orchestrator and we click on the agents tab at the very top here, this is where you can see all of the agents that are connected. So you click on add an agent, you get two options. One is to create a mini, like lightweight child agent inside the main agent, or you can do what I've just done, which is use a fully fledged set of custom engine agents from Copilot. So you can add those in like that. So click on that, and then you can choose whatever full agent you want to add. Super easy. That's it for today. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.